Okay, welcome back, everybody. If you want to take your seats, ladies and gents, we are going to proceed with the afternoon and our discussion for the rest of today. Hope you all had a good lunch, managed to rub shoulders with a few new contacts and friends. We've got a really splendid afternoon lined up for you. It promises to be thought-provoking, hopefully inspiring, and possibly entertaining as well. You may have heard over the last couple of weeks about this new report from the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Science and Technology in Agriculture, calling for a radical reset in how the UK produces its food. It's part of something called the 30-50-50 Innovation Agenda, which is kind of like a blueprint for how to feed Britain sustainably by 2050. We're going to be hearing about that, some big ideas there. I am particularly looking forward to hearing from Professor Pete Falloon, who's the Met Office's Science Lead on Food Security. He's going to be chatting to us a little later. And to get us off to a flying start for this afternoon, two excellent speakers with plenty to say for themselves and about our theme for this conference, which is the impact of new global norms on agri-food supply chains. I would like to welcome to the stage, they're here, Tim Smith, who's chairman of Cranswick PLC, one of Britain's largest food producers, and former NFU president and farmer Baroness Batters. Well, Minette, as I think we'll call her for today's purposes. Minette, who's just led the DEFRA review into farm profitability, which, well, I was thinking the government was due to respond to it in the next week or so, but from what we heard a little earlier, it looks like it's going to be before Christmas. Anyway, first of all, Tim Smith. Tim is a reservoir of knowledge and experience in the food industry at the very highest level and across a really broad spectrum as well, from supermarket retail at Tesco, processing at Arla, and in government regulation leading the Food Standards Agency. He's currently chairman of Cranswick PLC, which is one of the biggest and most successful UK food producers, and he's going to talk to us about the challenges and opportunities of managing a successful meat processing organisation. Tim, please take the podium.
Thanks, Kaz. I don't think I've ever been described as a reservoir before, but I think that might just be another way of describing my age. Good afternoon. Welcome back after your lunch. Hopefully you haven't eaten so much that it's going to prove soporific, but I'll be able to tell by the time we get to the end of this short talk. I'm going to talk to you about growth and the way that the food sector needs to respond to the challenges ahead of it, not just meat, but the whole sector. But I'm going to provide a bit of context first. And some of you will know this, and some of you it might be fresh to. So I'll start with some basics. For our government, the UK government, the food supply chain is designated as critical national infrastructure. And there are 13 so identified groupings. And all those things that are identified, you won't be surprised to know what some of them are, but stick to food, then they are fundamental to our national security. So I think it makes sense, if you're thinking about resilience, as I'm going to talk about in a moment, and our food security, we also need to think about how we blend that with growth to get to the future. It's said by others, not necessarily me, that we're facing a devastating confluence. And so we have climate change, we've got a growing incidence of obesity, population growth, and global instability, all of which have exposed fragile food systems. We're seeing some price spikes, we've seen supply chain disruptions, and growing inequalities. So without digging too much into the detail of all of those, you'll know all of those. Simply put, we are not a resilient food system in this country. We've seen quite a lot of interest, but not necessarily knowledge in the food system from our government and advisors. Here in the UK, what most of us are trying to do is connect our consumer with production, and that's what we should do. But we'll achieve those critical benefits of having that connection, but we'll also raise their interest as we do in some of the challenges. Price is consistently central to how citizens view their food supply, but those same people are thinking about the impact that we all have on the planet and the care that we take looking after farmed animals. First and foremost, the primary message from me is that the resilience message is in isolation, it's a futile goal. And planning for growth makes no sense without a proper 21st century long-term food strategy. I'm going to talk a bit more about that. And that will include, obviously, resilience, but it also has to include, and I'll feed this in a couple of times, proper incentives for farmers, growers, and food producers to invest. What's the purpose of that strategy? What's the point of having a strategic plan? It really doesn't have to be complicated. So in my world, what I say to people is, for everyone to have access to affordable, healthy, sustainable food consistently and in a system that's fair for everyone involved, from farmers to consumers. So that's playing through my mind when I'm thinking about the talk that I'm giving you now. So we need some big ideas to fix some of those issues, but what is the plan? Who can take the necessary actions to make the plan a reality? And those ideas, which have then got to be supported by direct actions, plans that can be turned into reality. So I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective, I think, to one that you'll have heard this morning, and that is that it's not exactly a perfect lens, but I found in my Cranswick days it's useful to take an institutional shareholder and investor expectation on the system. Cranswick, you'll know, most of you, I guess, we have a history of spending around 100 million a year on capital expenditure. The plan is to spend 100 million for each of the next few years for the foreseeable future, and we'll spend well in excess of that in this calendar financial year. So we're valued at about 3 billion, varies obviously day to day, but our investors expect our management to solve the problems that come with running that business. And they obviously include thinking about growth, some inertia on planning, but they correctly perceive that for policymakers, there's just a lack of understanding and support. And those investors raise concerns with me and with my management team about delays to capital. And those capital plans are not fanciful. They are to meet increasing consumer demand. And that's just demand from what we call white space, the addressable market that is being displaced at the moment by imports of, particularly, in my case, poultry and pork. Those same shareholders would note the lack of cross-government coordination. So that's departments not working collectively, and they work individually, and you will know that for yourselves. And policies without real action. So lots of reports, lots of policy suggestions, even the odd white paper, but not enough action. They don't understand, my investors, why food and drink is not part of the government's industrial strategy. It's there, but it's being badged as part of the everyday economy, which sounds like a bit of an afterthought to those of us who worry about this sort of thing. So those could be concerns, and those concerns could be a barrier to investment, and they are specific to food and drink. We don't see that elsewhere. International competitors and investors are bemused by that same antipathy, particularly when it comes to planning constraints. There's an additional insight I'd like to just add from my experience, which is that if thinking about trade and agriculture and food, we don't want to risk turning the clock back on standards to achieve those trade deals. And this is a bit of a sidebar, but we are right to fight hard to ensure that at 3 o'clock in the morning during negotiation, food and drink isn't being given up for other trade priorities. If food loses and others win. So we need to fight our corner. So what? Back to the capital. There is a risk that capital flows to businesses outside the United Kingdom with a consequent damage to food security, to value, and that defies logic. It doesn't make any sense. Other sovereign states provide support of different types for their food industries. In a few short minutes, I just want to advocate a multi-pronged approach, I suppose, to improving food security and providing growth for the supply chain. One of the things that some of us have been doing is challenging the idea that we currently import food against no specific criteria. And there's been a series of kind of conversations about we could establish criteria designed to promote UK investment and sourcing. We didn't do that blindly, we do it using a business case. But the idea is that if by measuring what we currently provide for ourselves locally in the UK, and then measuring it against what we could provide, we can set ourselves some targets. it's fair to say, Minette and I were just exchanging a few notes there, that idea receives a fairly mixed review from politicians. But how would you all run your businesses, I would argue, without a plan, with measurables and without targets? So in the going of it, we're asked also to contemplate growth would be improved if we shorten supply chains to the extent that's possible, removing as much as we can agencies and middlemen from that transaction. That de-risks business, reduces vulnerability and carbon footprints. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't support local farmers. We should. We should be promoting diversity in our crops, and we should be investing in every stage, from concept to consumption. That strengthens our resilience. Sustainable agriculture is a transition, and we're all kind of engaged in that in one way or another, encouraged by our retailers and others. We want practices that we can use to build soil health, conserve water, reduce reliance on chemical inputs. And that means investing and rewarding innovative technology. It doesn't mean that scale is wrong. In other places at other times, we've been tested, I think, about whether large-scale consolidation is the right way to do it. I think it's more about collaboration rather than consolidation. But the evidence is what's key to that is no more narrow planning rules. I worry a little bit about fairness. Wherever you look, there is an opportunity, I think, to improve transparency so that we have fair prices for farmers and access to affordable, nutritious food for all of us. So that's the link. And if you had government departments who were working together, and there is a prospect of this happening, we would be able to address inequalities in the food supply chain. It means that food policy doesn't just work for people who live in Middlesex, it has to work equally well, if not better, for people who live in Middlesbrough. And that means supporting vulnerable communities, promoting fair trade practices. And we want farmers, growers, processors, manufacturers to invest, to give the certainty over the sort of timescale that works to them. And in case it's not really obvious, that isn't how the political cycle works. So shifting gears back a bit to where government fits in, lots of the responsibilities I've talked to are shared by many, but there are some things that only government can do. Experience shows, as I've just said, the political cycle is not a good match for farming or investment in supply chains. And I always assume farmers are thinking in generations, manufacturers are working in 10 to 15 year payback time sometimes, and politicians are working in sort of 3 to 5 year cycles. That is a fundamental flaw in our system. But they do need to play a proactive role in shaping our food systems, making them more resilient. The most critical driver of all of that in my world is the retailer. They're the ones who face the consumer, right? So they are the ones who need us to act in a way that is national, if not global. And inherently, they're not local, which means that food policy, national food plans don't work 100% unless we've managed to find good collaborative working with the devolved nations. So there is a role for innovation in that, and there is a role for niche market exploitation. But I'm thinking about the 80-20, where we're talking mass market supply, mass market demand. Like I suppose many of you, we've got used to in Cranswick needing a good dollop of self-help. And I'm thinking here about labour, where we fixed our own problems, commodity shortages, where we've had to be creative, and energy concerns. But we're less able as a business to find answers to planning concerns and access to water. Those would be the two things that right now government could signal, probably on a statutory basis, how they might improve that so that we could improve our resilience and get our self-sufficiency numbers up. When I look around the world, and I sometimes get the chance to do that, I notice that other nations have prioritised some of those issues to get food security up. It means shifting our focus from maximising production to optimising resilience, but the two things pretty much always go hand in hand, and it requires a more holistic approach that considers environmental, social, economic factors. And something we're not great at in the UK, and something I know many of us speak about frequently, and that is supply chain collaboration. I'm not talking about breaching the competition rules, I'm talking about finding ways to work together collaboratively, even if that's only to persuade people who might not want to release us on planning, release us on water, to do something different. We do deserve, I think, government support and policies which recognise and incentivise investment in the structure. We want to be able to empower our communities, we want to be able to support farmers, and we want to be able to engage consumers. So building food resilience is not just about food, it's about building a more just and sustainable future for everyone. Thank you.
Tim, thank you so much for that. We're going to be taking questions for Tim shortly. If you have a question you would like to ask, please type it into Slido. I'm expecting we're going to have quite a busy Q&A session, so do get your questions in ASAP, as it were. Now, Baroness Batters, Minette Batters, she has taken the podium. Former President of the National Farmers Union, sits as a crossbench peer in the House of Lords, and I've got to say, I mean, she does obviously constantly bang the drum for British farming, which is, you know, a fantastic thing. She's just delivered her review into farm profitability into the hands of the government. DEFRA, I am sure, considering its 57 recommendations as we speak. In fact, Angela Eagle is probably doing it on the train back to London right now. Who knows? Minette, lovely to see you. Please give us your thoughts.
Kaz, thank you. And what a privilege it is to be back here. I have to say, the AIC Conference has grown considerably since I last spoke here. Wonderful to see so many of you last night. A few of you nervously saying this morning, you're not really going to talk us through 57 recommendations, are you? So you'd be pleased to know that I am not. But it is a bit frustrating that it is taking longer than certainly I had hoped to have this work published. It would be so much easier to talk to all of you about it if you'd had the opportunity to read it. And it's fair to say there is a 10-minute read or there is a 4-hour read. So when you come to it, you've got your choice. But look, it was interesting to hear Angela Eagle speak this morning. And I'm really reminded of the churn and change in DEFRA. So from when I was appointed president of the NFU in 2018 to now, we are on our 9th Secretary of State. So that is effectively more than 1 a year, and we're on our 5th Prime Minister. So is it any wonder that there's been so much churn and change? And the point that I left you with last night, that in 2019, effectively 10% of people understood ELMS, and in 2025, 7% of people understood ELMS. And much as I think the mood music in the room is that a lot of people liked Angela Eagle's attitude, nobody is still any the wiser, including me, of the road that we are on and the plan. So when I was asked to do this, I was really clear on a few things. One was I was tasked with also focusing on diversification, which I refused to do because I said, otherwise the recommendation will be that we should have less farming and more diversification. So it was all about farming. And I had to be basically mindful of the net zero objectives and in line with the climate change targets. So I could have written a great review that many of you in this room would have absolutely loved, but I've been really conscious that this has to deliver a process, a strategy for farming profitability, but it also has to deliver on government priorities. It has to deliver for taxpayers and it has to deliver for consumers. And if it delivers for all 4 of those, it stands the best chance of happening. I've said it and I'll continue to say it, there are no silver bullets. And I've had many of the wise cracks of, so we're really looking forward to it. What are you going to say that is going to resolve farming profitability? There is no one thing, and you all know that. But we can, and we do need to do things very, very differently. The evidence that I've worked with on the back of the questions that I've asked are stark. We are at a real fork in the roads, and the next 2 years, and I'm really serious about this, for every sector, for everybody, we have to get this right, and we don't have long. So we've got 2 years effectively to turn things round. And we are quite good as an industry at kicking the can down the road. That is going to have to stop. If I look at, a lot of people saying when I took this on, well, the top performing farmers are producing the bulk of the nation's food. Actually, that is not right. The middle performing farmers are producing the bulk of the output. So those mid-performing farmers are 57% of land area, and they are 65% of output. So that's where the bulk of it is coming from, and they are vulnerable. So if you take out BPS, if you remove SFI, over a 10-year rolling program, there's only about 2 years that they are profitable. So that's pretty stark when you are 65% of output. The top performing farms, on the other hand, are 25% of land area, and they are 32% of output. But the really stark figure in all of this is that only 8% of the top performing farmers are profitable over a 5-year rolling program, only 8%. They have 2 things, all of these have 2 things that really matter in this. A really good business, a really good control of input costs is essential, but profitability only really comes with scale. So you can have, and I've looked at plenty of really good business models, but if they don't have scale, if you remove everything else, then they are not profitable. And that is a real challenge within the sort of UK farming structure. And I've been really clear with ministers and the department. Effectively, they face, three choices. They always have done. They could use the previous budget, the farming budget, effectively, for regulating the environment. We could have less farming here. We could have more cheaper imports, potentially, of food. That, I would say, is to a certain extent definitely where we started the Elms journey. There was an ambition to have less farming, public monies for public goods, more money for regulating the environment. The other one is that we let our farmers be globally competitive. We don't subsidize them, but we allow them to operate fairly on the world stage. The final one, which is the road that I've tried to follow, is the middle ground. How do we, as I said at the beginning, how do we create something that works for everyone? There are some quick wins, without doubt. Planning and streamlining planning, and a Whitehall blueprint for planning would massively speed things up. DEFRA is effectively a legacy of our time in Europe. The arm's length bodies are legacy from our time in Europe. They are responsive to our time in Europe. They are absolutely not fit. The department is not fit in its current way of working for an independent trading nation, and most importantly, an independent nation that has 4 parts to it. It isn't just about England. It is about Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland alongside England. So I've put forward a Whitehall blueprint for planning. There is enormous opportunity to streamline, to take a lot of cost out. The BNG requirements should be removed. We're delivering those at a landscape scale anyway. On-farm permitted development rights, again, speeding up the ability to have on-farm turbines, on energy usage, more clean green energy as the grid expands. Farms play a massive role in sustainability in rural areas, but on-farm reservoirs as well within permitted development rights. So there's quite a lot you can look at in the short term of things that can be done. But of course, you can see why, when I talk about wider departments, why it doesn't work for us on our own. So MHCLG deals with planning, but it doesn't deal with farming. So it doesn't have a blueprint for planning, and DEFRA hasn't had a blueprint for planning because MHCLG deals with it. But on a plus side, Steve Reed is now in MHCLG. He knows all the problems. So I really hope it is something that we can sort out. A lot of the critics to date have been around BPS going to large landowners and marginalising smaller farmers. I think the worry I have, and the farming minister talked this morning about, a further £2 billion of investment coming in. We have no transparency on the budget, so even I have not been able to unearth where these monies are going or where the plan and objectives lie. So I was very much tasked with the land use framework, the food strategy, and the farming roadmap. How can we set out a roadmap to deliver better farming profitability, bringing all of those three areas effectively together? But it is a world of winners and losers right now. So you have things like the Landscape Recovery Project, diamonds in a paper crown is what I've referred to them as. They are sort of 20-year contracts with the state. And if you're in one, great, you're in a diamond area. If you're outside of one, which is more than likely, then you're in the paper crown. And what we've got to find is an approach that actually delivers fair treatment to the whole country. I received over 400 asks. So if you're thinking 57 recommendations is a lot, that is consolidation of the tsunami of asks that I received. I didn't disagree with any of them, but to me, they were a real sign of the challenge that we face. The industry and the government are a million miles away from coalescing around what I would call as the common cause. The points have been made, Rob Sheasby earlier, about value. You know, the first question I sort of asked myself was, are we valued? Do we matter? I can remember when I was at the NFU, several conversations with Whitehall saying, well, farming matters because it underpins this and it underpins that, and all these businesses are here because raw ingredients are grown here. And I would get people look at me and say, farming couldn't matter less. It is 0.6% of GDP. So this really matters, and this is my first recommendation point in the review. Talking to New Zealand, talking to Ireland. New Zealand, as an example, measures primary production and primary processing as one. But they also measure their other allied trades, their other relationships. In New Zealand, 80% of their value of GDP comes from the other areas that they underpin. So the first recommendation is that we should be, DEFRA, working with ONS to get that measurement right of primary processing and primary production. But then we should be measuring the other areas, tourism, recreation. Actually, the ONS have done a lot of this, but we've not calibrated it into the farmed landscape. So that's a really important point. And Emma Reynolds said when she read my exec summary, she said, the point I'm most struck with is this lack of value. And then, when we've recalibrated that, we have to do this in measurable terms. So the opportunities of economic growth, wealth creation. We have been a service-based economy for most of our time in Europe, and that needs to change. So Tim mentioned a national plan. I really want to focus on the sector missions. What are the sector missions? What are our plans for growth? And then look at this from the international to the national, to the regional, to the local level. We focus a lot of our attention on retail, but we need to know those market signals of what retail wants. And this is how you set informed targets, by knowing what your home market wants, knowing what your sector missions are, and then you can start to get clarity of where you should be exporting and how you grow your export market. And how you get like New Zealand, whereby when they're over here, they say, these are the three things that we want to talk to you about. We're a long way off being able to say that. So I'm absolutely recommending partnership. I'm absolutely focused on this being measurable. I want the industry and the government to really measure this on 6 monthly terms. So 6 months in, they need to measure it. And I've set out in my conclusions where they need to get to. 12 months in, industry and government need to measure it. And I've said that I must re-review in 2 years' time, because that 2-year time point that I mentioned at the beginning is critical. We have to get from here to there in that time. Just some final thoughts, and conscious of time. The supply and demand situation, when we are importing more, the situations, the game-changing situations with the US trade deal that, believe you me, are far from over. When I look at where we are with dairy right now, we've got to be able to manage supply and demand with precision accuracy. We've got to know what the national plan is. And at the moment, we are making decisions on our farms with no idea what the national plan is. And that is what has got to change. We've got to know what the national plan is, and we've got to know what the plan is on the ground, on our farms. On the SFI, briefly, I have been insistent that for the 50% of those farming businesses that are not part of it at the moment, applications must open as soon as possible. I don't think it is right to not have the SFI aligned to food production. It absolutely should be aligned to food production, and we can deliver multiple public good benefits, food benefits, sustainability benefits, resilience benefits. The point Tim made on resilience in isolation doesn't deliver. It absolutely doesn't. But the ability to produce more of our proteins, more of our pulses, more of our oil seeds, all of those will deliver better levels of resilience in the arable sector. They are all being demanded by the marketplace. More homegrown proteins. The slide this morning on soya, we should be aiming to displace soil with sustainably grown proteins over the next decade. With precision breeding, we can absolutely start to make really seismic progress in these areas. So I guess just in conclusion, I've been really guided by Ireland in my thoughts, both on market development and Teagasc, which they set up initially with a research station and the state coming together. So effectively, it was the equivalent of ADAS and a research station coming together. They do things together. They prepare their strategic plans together. And I've been really clear with ministers. When I talk about partnership, partnership is real on both sides. Partnership is not the government telling the industry how it's done. It's about developing those strategic plans together, both for market development, but also for research. The UK is really, really good at this, but it has lost its way. Our opportunities on big goal-orientated commercial research projects have to be the way forward, but sector by sector, they have to be as well. We are a very, very diverse farming and growing landscape, and we need to be ready to deal with what we're facing into. So it's a whole new approach that I am recommending, and it, as I say, works from the international level to the local level. By really focusing on UK-grown raw ingredients, wealth creation, growth within a UK economy. And that means a different approach from government, it means a different approach from the industry, but it's doable and it's achievable. And the outcomes, I think in conclusion, what I would say, Kaz, on the evidence I have, if we do this, it really can work. If we don't do it, I'm really concerned about what lies ahead. I can only see more of a monoculture farming system coming forwards. I think we lose the family farm structure that we have to date. And so the pressure is on everybody because time is not on our side, but the opportunity is there for all to be had. Thank you.
Minette, thank you so much for that. I want to grab you. We're going to take questions. We've got a few coming into Slido, and in a moment, I'm going to ask you to wave your arm in the air if you would like to ask a question in person. It's always really good if we get a few questions in person as well, so that would be great if you have questions for Tim or for Minette. First of all, though, I just want to get your gut feeling from when you heard the minister this morning, when you were sitting there in the audience and you heard her speak. What did you take away from it? What were your thoughts? Were you positive?
Yeah, I think what I have got used to over the years is you have to be positive and you have to be engaged. Anger actually doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, it sort of makes you feel better temporarily. But you've got to work with. So those 9 secretaries of state and all these new farming ministers coming in, you've just got to, as fast as you can, create the relationship. And I think get them excited, and I hope that's what she went away with today, and she will continue to go away with, is excitement. This is an exciting area. It's not a basket case that's pleading. There's so much opportunity here, and that's what I hope she...
Yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted. And the first thing you said that when you started doing your review into farm profitability, the first thing you asked was, are farmers valued? Is farming valued? Have you come away with an idea that it is valued by government?
It's not in a position to be valued at the moment. And because it isn't in a position to be valued, it isn't understood. And I genuinely think that the situations with IHT, access to labour, planning, all of those things come about because the sector is not understood and nobody sees the value. If they saw the value, maybe decisions made would have been different. So this valuing point is critical, and something that Emma Reynolds has really bought into and said that she wants to change.
Yeah, there's a great question that's come in here. What are the risks that your report ends up like the Dimbleby report, just gathering dust in the difficult box?
So, I mean, Henry's work got undone by two things. You know, Boris Johnson had got the Red Wall supporting him, and then the thought of going out and taxing these people on the food that they were buying just chucked that work under the bus, because the Prime Minister just said, no, we're not doing that. And it was all that work that was lost on the back of a press release. And press releases are really, really dangerous things, in my opinion. And, you know, they are probably the greatest risk to my work. I think Andrew Meredith is here. I did say there were two key audiences for me. One was the Secretary of State and the other was the trade press. And that if we didn't please the trade press, we wouldn't please the Secretary of State. So the media is really important. But behind all of that has to be the comprehensive plan. And so I would really urge, before anybody writes anything, that they do the 4-hour read and then write about it, because that's what undid Henry's work, literally on the Today programme in one morning, which was a tragedy. So it can't sit on a shelf. I mean, look, we shouldn't underestimate the challenges that we face. And we have to be very alive to that. And the evidence, what I definitely use is a lot of aggregated evidence. If you aggregate everything all the time, it will give you a fairly anodyne answer. If you strip it out and ask specific questions, and it's all in the report, you will see it. It's stark.
Okay. A question for both of you, actually. This is one from me. I'm so sorry. We're going to get onto these ones that are coming in on Slido in a moment. It's just that, you know, the government's key ambition continually, they say all the time, growth, growth, growth. We've got to have growth. Is it doing enough to build confidence in business, to make the investment that will produce that growth? Tim?
No, and it is a difficult challenge to move from the previous position of governments, which is to be pretty much silent on planning, on access to water, and access to labour being dominated by migration and not by the actual needs of the sector. There are green shoots appearing in terms of their ability to understand that to be able to do that work, they need to work cross-departmentally. And I've sat in meetings now where there's been Treasury officials and ministers, there have been health officials starting to comprehend that unless you build those particular bridges and set aside departmental barriers, then that it won't happen. They find it very difficult to define growth except in those kind of top half dozen or so items that they've got in the industrial strategy, which is why Minette's work on showing value is so important. And I'll just give you one example. When a Welsh hill farmer gave me evidence at the Trade and Agriculture Commission about why we should keep him effectively in a protected category, he missed the entirely most important point. He was looking after the landscape. He wasn't just giving social goods, he was actually providing an area where people wanted to walk and wanted to spend their leisure time, but nobody ever put a value on it, and that's growth.
Okay. Minette, have you got any comments to add to that? Because, I mean, that's what it goes on, they go on about all the time, growth.
Yeah,
I mean, we're going to invest?
Well, you can talk growth, but ultimately growth only comes from meaningful actions. Otherwise, it's just words on a press release. So it is about actions. It is about the ability to work together. DBT, government departments are not only not joined up, they are in competition. So the points made earlier on DBT and DEFRA, those two departments throughout have been in absolute stark opposition. I mean, they really do not get on. They might as well be different parties as departments. So you have to bring a shared approach. Farming businesses sit in DEFRA. So you either put the farming businesses in DBT, or you create a way that you deal with raw ingredients. DBT gets excited because it can see actually the opportunity here, and DBT then starts to work with. But at the moment, DBT drives over DEFRA on quite a regular basis.
Okay. Any questions from the floor? Give me a wave if you would like to ask a question from the floor. We have a gentleman here. I wonder if we have our roving mic about. The roving mic is making its way across to you now. Tell you what, I'm going to ask a question from Slido while the roving mic is making its way to you. Would our industry be better coming off subsidies like New Zealand did? Tim, first of all.
Well, I'm in a happy position of saying that I don't think any of our farms in the Cranswick Empire benefit from any subsidy at all, poultry and pork. And we have found a way to make our business and our farmers connected to us either through ownership or other arrangements, contractual arrangements, profitable. So I know there is a way to do it. The counter to that is if you ask me whether Cranswick would want to invest in the more difficult areas of agriculture which are subsidised, the answer is not right now.
Okay, Minette.
Well, it's in many ways a hypothetical question because the era of subsidy has ended, particularly in England.
Depends how you define subsidy, doesn't it? I mean, a lot of people would say there are no subsidies now. It's just money for profit foregone, profit lost.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the figures that I was working with is 2007 budget. When you build in inflation, we've delinked. So the point that I make on SFI is about, you know, we've got these environmental legislated targets. You can deliver nature and resilience outcomes in the field because we face the choices. If you look at the Nature Recovery Fund within Natural England, if you look at the BNG credits are incredibly expensive, and the Nature Recovery Fund will go more money into the nature reserves and the protected landscapes. If we are really serious about change and the ability to be able to produce more and impact less and deliver these sustainability outcomes, we've got to invest in it. And we've got to invest and put a value on nature. And so that is essential. That is not a subsidy. That is the public monies for the public goods. And, you know, we have legislated on it, so the corporate community is needing actually an affordable opportunity on nature. BNG is holding infrastructure back at the moment because it is narrow and it is expensive. So actually, if you bring in the farmed landscape and you look at it as a whole, you bring the value down, but you maintain what we've got. I don't think anybody wants to see a sort of vast monoculture system. We should be totally focused with the food strategy on whole foods being a vital metric as we go forward. So I think the conversation on subsidy is gone, to my mind.
Right, okay. Gentleman on the floor here who's got the mic, just to mention who you are. Before.
Thank you, yeah, David McCauley from Mead & Search. My question actually was to Tim. Tim, earlier on we had a fascinating talk around the impact of AI. I wondered, with your Cranswick hat on, given you're one of the largest food manufacturers, one of the largest pig farmers in the UK, how much time you're spending at a board level or outside of board discussing around both the positive and negative impact that AI might have on the agri-food supply chain?
Thank you, David. I haven't. We spend a lot of time speaking about the benefits of AI, and none of us have really been able to identify too many negatives at this stage that relate to the sector. We have now got AI-enabled cameras observing our pig farms, and they're able to detect. I find this absolutely remarkable. They're able to detect movements and activities on farm that are not conducive to the best animal welfare. That just blows my mind, but we can then report those and act on them as necessary. AI linked to robotics, some of you might have visited our site at Preston. That usually blows people's minds too, because we can take cost out of a high quality piece of protein by using AI and robotic cutting. It is just remarkable. And, you know, I don't think we've begun to get to the end of that chapter of what it could do for all of us. And there are some societal nervousness, obviously, quite rightly, but on a food processing level, you know, I can only see younger general managers and their teams embracing this with massive enthusiasm.
Interesting. I mean, I saw on your website last night, I was just Googling through, like you do, an advert for an AI cooker operative. I mean...
Yeah, that's not that.
No, that's not that. That's something else. No. Who knows what that is? Do you know what it is?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
That's effectively sous vide technology. So slow cooking.
Right. Okay, interesting. Minette, there's a question on this, that AI is well related that for you. Given what we've heard this morning about AI and all the discussion about AI, do you see a role for AI to support any of your 57 recommendations?
Oh, I think without doubt the land use framework. You can imagine a way that you could really drive, one of my recommendations, twofold effectively, insetting and offsetting. We've got to have both, but we've got more and more and more of the baselining that is actually not in agreement. And the opportunity, I think, with the land use framework is to be able to have a standardized approach. That isn't a standard, that is the approach of how we're measuring the baseline. But AI, I think, and a land use framework, you could really then start to be agile to the landscape on a land sharing point of view, so that how we do all of this. My worry would be things like landscape recovery projects are still this either or. And for me, and the whole of my review is focused on sharing and actually how we, have corridors to join things up rather than how we have food here and environment there. That would be disastrous. And AI offers that opportunity with that framework.
Yeah. Any questions from the floor, or I shall take another one from Slido. That's what I'm going to do in that case. This is one that's been in here for ages, so I'm going to ask you, what's the panel's view on new UK government legislation on contracts between buyers and farmers in pig, dairy, etc. sectors? Is it a substantive change or business as usual? Tim?
Well, some of you know I spent quite a lot of time in dairy, and now pig meat and poultry. It smacks of market failure to me if you cannot have a proper commercial partnership between the respective parties with the power equal on all sides, that they can't reach a dialogue and a constructive end which is profitable for both. There is no sense in having a farming relationship if you're a processor that doesn't result in the other party being profitable in the same way as they would want it to be profitable, so that they'd satisfy bankers and investors. Whenever I've talked to ministers about this, they kind of wag their fingers as if to suggest that the fairness test will be failed by the major processors. It won't, because we've all got good arrangements in place where we know that our farming colleagues and collaborators are effectively seeking the same objectives we are.
Okay. Minette, you've said before that, that basically there needs to be a true and meaningful partnership between government and the industry. And I guess I want to ask about how we get from here to there. Big change is needed. How do we get from here to there? How difficult is that? And do you think, what are the mechanisms that are needed to make that happen?
The sector missions are really important. Every sector is different. What Tim has been talking about, pigs, poultry, horticulture versus broadacre, and then dairy. Every sector is different. So the sector missions are really important. We've had the Food and Drink Sector Council. Tim has been involved with it for a long time. I sat on it for 5 years, and it was effectively a talking shop because we had no common cause. Sorry, Tim, I don't mean like it was very well chaired.
Well done.
It was, but
I'm crushed.
But there wasn't a common cause.
Yeah.
The government wasn't saying, this is the road that we're on, this is how we're going to get there. So it ended up with everybody coming to the table and asking and telling the government what it was doing wrong. And then if you look at Ireland, if you look at New Zealand, and the point on, New Zealand, is unsubsidised. New Zealand's absolutely committed because agriculture is 10% of GDP. They are working together. And my goodness, would we opt for that any day of the week? They've had a lot of things that they've gone through, but they are working together. That doesn't mean to say they agree on everything, but they have a far more business-focused approach. And this 5-year, the ministers are very opposed to this target point. And a number of times I've heard, well, this is Stalinist, this is Marxist. This is how you run a business.
Yeah.
If you don't have a long-term plan for running a business.
Well, I mean, there's a specific question about that says, how do you persuade the politicians that they need targets? You put these targets in place, you put the plan in place. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I had to stop saying the word target because I was getting called Marxist on a regular basis by the Labour government. But anyway, that's an aside. But what we've got to do is we've got to find out what the home market wants, what it's going to want next year, what it's going to want in 3 years' time, and 4 years' time, 5 years' time, and where the sectors want to go. That's fundamental to know that, right? We've got to know that. We've got a lot more imports coming in, so we'll need a lot more exports going out. So the centre of what my proposal is market monitoring, so that we have the best real-time information available to us, and we don't have that at the moment, and for all sectors. So whether that's for input costs or whether that's for imports, but we've got to know that, Kaz, and then you can start to make longer-term plans. But at the moment, I feel they're talking food security. You made the point about it being part of critical national infrastructure. We've now got to act on that.
Yeah.
You know, energy is they're making decisions because they want energy to work. So you've got the ability of Secretary of States to sign off on energy requirements. You don't have the same approach to food. So various different things. You set it out in my report, it's set up within the first 6 months. So
Oh, we look forward to that then. No pressure.
They have until August.
But I think for ministers, what gets them out of bed in the morning is the idea of white papers and the idea of statutory basis. So if any or all of Minette's recommendations, which I've not seen either, turn out to be requiring statutory basis to make sure that ministers and others have to report on them with whatever frequency suggests, that's the right thing to do. And if that brings them to the table and gets them moving, that's fine.
Okay, I've got another question on Slido here. Net zero, water scarcity and sustainable business practices are becoming increasingly polarised by politicians and the media. How do we combat that narrative?
How long have we got? Really?
Not long.
Okay, so we have to decide as a nation the priority that we give to our food security and the resilience that we want to apply, and how much of that food needs to be grown and produced here in the UK. And we have to, when I say priority, I mean it has to take precedence. So it has to take precedence in some ways over the way that we allocate water resources, the way we think about our transition to net zero, all of which is going on. You know, there's an assumption that you have to do one or the other. You do not. You can do all of this in a much more environmentally stable way. And by the way, every one of our shareholders, Cranswick shareholders, wants to know how we're getting on with Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. And they want to know how we're going to decarbonise. It's not something that investors don't think about.
Yeah, it's not either or, is it? No. Minette, anything to add on that?
Well, I think the net zero, what I worry about in the whole net zero conversation is, and the decarbonisation, you know, we have got to be focused on how we effectively are producing more and impacting less. And it's the impacting point, you know, everybody, if you ask them, do they want to be net zero? Probably a lot of farmers would say, well, no, that's unachievable. If you ask them if they want a better business, they want to cut their costs, then everybody would say yes. And so that genuine focus on sustainability. We talk about cutting methane emissions in livestock and dairy, but actually that's not a sector that needs decarbonising. You know, that is a carbon. You are eating carbon. You don't need to decarbonise it. We all know that the photosynthesis, the more you can be using crops, grass that is being grazed, the more carbon is sequestered. So understanding it's just not all about feed additives. And I think we have a huge opportunity to be leading the charge on that globally. But I worry about the CBAM. You know, we are going to be taxing in these areas. So understanding of it is really, really important.
Well, understanding, partnership, collaboration, all of these things that we've been talking about today, yeah, critical. And how we get there is the big question, I guess, isn't it really? Thank you so much both for coming on and sharing your insight, perspectives, all of those sorts of things. It's been really interesting hearing from you. Tim Smith and Minette Batters.
Thank you.
Okay, right. So far today we have talked politics, we've looked at markets, and during this last hour of the conference, we're moving on to discuss some more big ideas. Coming up, we've got a new vision for farming in the UK to boost food security and lessen its impact on the planet by 2050. That's what we're going to be talking about in a little while. But before that, how might changing weather patterns and global heating affect our ability to do just that, to create that new vision for farming? I'm hoping our next speaker might be able to shed a little light on the subject. He is Professor Pete Falloon, the Met Office's science lead on food security. He also leads the Met Office's climate service for DEFRA on food, farming and the natural environment. And he's a contributing author to the UK's climate change risk assessment. Pete, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me today. Hopefully, what I'm going to try and share about the work we've been doing in this area is going to be of interest to you. I'll also say a number of things. There's a lot more I could share. I'm going to spare you for that. It's getting late in the day after lunch. But there are links in the slides to further information, and the slides that will go online will have some extra stuff at the end, some links and so on. So hopefully that's helpful. So I'm going to talk about global, particularly longer-term climate change and impacts on supply chains and agriculture and food, particularly with a UK lens, but looking a bit globally as well. I think, to me, really what the challenge is with climate change and adapting to the changes in climate that we're seeing. So I'm really thinking here not so much about net zero, but more about the risk and resilience space. A number of things. So the reports from the Climate Change Committee in recent years have shown not only that are extreme weather events one of the most concerning shocks to the food system in coming decades, the plans and policies and what we're doing practically about adapting to climate change is also not where we would like it to be. And actually there are two of these reports through time. They're biennial reports. The last two have shown that. At the same time, new climate science that we've seen coming out of the Met Office is suggesting that these extreme events might be quite unpredictable or volatile, if you like. So unlike global average temperatures, which you'd, to a degree, might expect to increase smoothly in some way or another, particularly in the long term, you might see, particularly for the UK, things like heavy rainfall records being broken in a succession of years. And then you might see years or decades with nothing like that. So more volatility. And of course, I haven't got something on this year, just gone really here, but we've seen practical living experience of some of these extreme events, which, as I'll show shortly, are what we would expect from longer-term climate patterns, the very high temperatures impacting on poultry in particular, in housing in 2022, but also all the way through to retail refrigeration, particularly in the east of England where the temperatures were the highest. There were refrigeration failures, and the wet season, of course, which had a huge impact on wheat outputs. So, what are we doing? And I think it's perhaps helpful if I set the context for where this work's coming from. It's very much building on the themes, actually, that I think Minette was mentioning, partnership and collaboration. Over about the last 10 years or so, we've been working very closely with DEFRA on this climate service on food, farming and natural environment. It's really designed to support DEFRA with scientific evidence and support adaptation policy. So it's science meets policy rather than sort of practical on the ground decision making. But nevertheless, I think there's probably some resonance and relevance here, and we're moving on that journey. The other piece is we're also working with DEFRA's genetic crop improvement networks. So there are 5 specific crop improvement networks, and we are providing climate change information to support the traits of more resilient, hopefully more resilient traits of crops for the future. What we're trying to do really at the top of the piece on the right-hand side is take the climate projections that we produce in the UK. They look at long-term and general things like temperature and rainfall. We're trying to work in partnership with academics, to a degree with industry and others, to make those projections relevant to agricultural questions and issues, feed it into a formal adaptation policy cycle. So we do have a 5-yearly cycle of climate adaptation policy across all sectors in the UK, under the set into motion by the Climate Change Act, and also this UK Food Security Report, which DEFRA produce every 3 years, also under Act of Parliament, looking at trends and the state of the food system in different ways. And we're bringing climate change thinking into that too. What's the journey really looking like on that? I'm not going to go into the detail of these. Some of them I will come back to a bit further down the line in the talk. But what we're trying to do, as I mentioned before, is take climate change information, understand what that means in terms of the hazards to agriculture and food. So this is, rather than a change, say, in temperatures, it's a specific measure of temperature and humidity as a indicator of animal heat stress for cattle. We're using that knowledge of when and where these risks might occur across the country to identify what the practical adaptation measures might be, quick wins, and I'll come back to that again. And also it's been really encouraging to see that some of these approaches are being taken up and built into industry decision making. That's an example there from the Duchy of Cornwall's annual report, which built on similar pieces of work that we've done. So starting with the global picture and climate change, this is from the last IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. It's looking at patterns of temperature and rainfall for 2 degrees. So if we have 2 degrees of warming globally, what do the patterns look like? And you'll see higher temperatures over land, higher temperatures further north, and very mixed rainfall patterns. The ones I'd really point out, actually, in terms of rainfall, is some of these areas where we source lots of fruit and vegetables from, particularly in the winter. South Africa, Southern Europe, for example, see brown colours there, which are reductions in rainfall. Many of these, of course, already face water stress. What does that look like at home? We do have more specific climate projections for the UK, something called the UK Climate Projections. We tend to update these roughly every 5 years or so, and they're more detailed. The headline message for the 2050s would be seasonally, we'd expect hotter, drier summers, warmer, wetter winters, but an increase in extreme events, whether that's high temperatures, heavy rainfall events, longer periods without rain, longer droughty periods. And those, of course, as I mentioned earlier, are the big concerns for food and farming. What does that look like in terms of agriculture and food in the UK? Well, as I mentioned before, I'm involved in the climate change risk assessment, which is one of the elements of the adaptation policy cycle. This figure is taken from the 3rd climate change risk assessment. We are now working on the 4th one. I will also say, actually, the initial report is out for community review. If you would like to look at it and comment on it, we would really value input on where we are now. I just want to mention a few things really on this slide. Firstly, that the risks and opportunities as well. So the first is there are risks and opportunities. The second one is that those risks and opportunities are quite broad and impact right across the food supply chain and its activities, whether it's impacts of extreme events and seasonal changes to soils, to productivity on land, whether it's sea level rise impacting and flooding land, or bringing salt water into water and aquifers on land there, whether it's changing activities of pests, pathogens and non-native species, opportunities to grow new and different crops, impacts on things like food safety and security at home and overseas, and also opportunities to import and export in different ways. Because, as I showed a couple of slides ago, the climate changes in different ways around the world, and it will impact crop suitability, productivity in different ways. A few years back, again, a piece of partnership work, working with UK universities, Food Standards Agency, DEFRA, and UK Research and Innovation, we've been looking at scoping out what extreme events might mean for the UK food system and its activities. I don't really want to mention too much. There is this scoping paper out there, but a couple of things. That even if we take one of these extreme events, and as I've alluded to a bit earlier with the 2022 heat wave, we can see, for example, for high temperatures, it could impact all the way through the food supply chain. High temperatures will cause heat stress to crops, to animals, to outdoor workforces, supply shocks coming down through the chain. We may also therefore need, in higher temperatures, more cold chain, more refrigerated, air-conditioned storage, transport of food and so on. And of course, once we get down to the demand side, consumers eat different foods in high temperatures, and there may be issues in ambient temperatures with food safety and food wastage. And a few other things, I think, really from the supply chain side of things that I haven't talked so much about sea level rise, but particularly storm surges could have significant impacts on ports in the future, and heavy rainfall and flooding, of course, impacting transport and distribution networks. These figures here are actually taken from the UK Food Security Report 2024 that I mentioned earlier. They are taken from a global crop modelling effort, which basically brings together many different crop modelers with different climate data sets to look at what they think the most likely patterns, in this case for the 2050s high emission scenario, look like for the big four crops. I think something I'll outline as well, when we're looking at results like these, it's also important to be aware of what they do and don't tell us. So in this case, it's not thinking about pest and disease change. It's not thinking about changes in management. But you can see here the red colours are losses, percentage losses, the blue colours are gains. So quite big differences for some crops. Maize tends to see losses in many global regions due to high temperatures. Wheat tends to see gains here. Similarly for soybean, a bit more of a mixed pattern with rice. But these models also sometimes are challenged with representing extreme events and things like this too. So it's important to view these in the right context. Some of the work we've been doing with DEFRA, looking at climate adaptation and informing the risks and resilience, has been tailoring those sorts of projections to UK-specific crops. This is an example looking at wheat heat stress. So it's taking a particular time of year, a particular level of temperature, and looking across the crop regions. And so what we're seeing here is the number of events in 10 years that are seeing these concerning heat stress events during the crop anthesis period, flowering basically, a very sensitive period. On the left-hand side, in the present day, these events are really infrequent, but by the time we get through to the 2050s, they might be happening in the south of the UK once every other year or something like this. If we roll back that period 2 weeks in the year, rather than the first 2 weeks of June, we're coming to the last 2 weeks of May, we see much reduced impacts, as we might expect. There are two reasons for doing that. One is that change in management might be a way to adapt, and the other is that crops develop, reach maturity faster in warmer climates. So just another example really linking to some of the themes, I think, of AIC members really around pests and agrochemicals. This is a piece of work from my colleague Freya Gary looking at potato blight risk. So it's a combination of certain temperature levels and humidity levels, looking at the present day, the 2060s and the change. And really just to suffice to say on the right-hand side, looking out at the 2060s, we see big increases in the north and the west of the UK from potato blight risks. And finally, looking at the risks, we're also not just looking at the UK, we are looking at some of the key UK import regions. This particular figure is looking at water availability. We've also looked at high temperature risks. It's comparing to a particularly dry year. 2022 in Spain was very dry. It's looking across a range of different regions. The real message here is, I think 2022, the average for the baseline period are the red dots. The future are the blue bars. So there's a really big increase in how often we see these low water availability events in Spanish regions. So that's just a quick march through what some of the risks and challenges might look like. Working with ADAS, we've been looking at quick wins for adaptation. It's looking at practical measures which are high impact, easy to implement, relatively low cost, looking actually at a list of 150 practical farming measures to these different stresses, and also thinking in the main report regionally where they might be most effective. So it's looking at things like changing the cropping cycle, changing varieties, changing grassland species, changing operational management, lots around water management there, both on the dry and the wet side. The other point I wanted to mention, linking back to nutrients, agrochemicals and so on, is really just some thoughts from studies I've been involved in recent years. So it was posited during some of the crop modelling work we were doing that maybe changing fertiliser applications might help adapt to the future climate. This particular piece of work on the left-hand side, you can see the conclusion there, basically says that actually there wasn't much benefit to increasing fertiliser applications in a changing climate. In fact, it might be kind of the opposite. And then there are a couple of pieces of work looking at nutrient losses due to extreme weather events and losses of things like phosphate, nitrogen, but more broadly at agrochemicals in the environment, and really, again, highlighting the impact of these things like heavy rainfall events, particularly when preceded by dry periods, and the potential for losses of agrochemicals to be increased compared to how they are in the future. So we might see an increasing need or different needs for agrochemicals due to changing pest and disease patterns, but also there are other factors to think about in terms of what happens to them in a changing environment. There are also, and I've put some extra slides on these, tools and things that can be used in the industry. One of these is we do produce seasonal forecasts. They are not used in anger in the industry. I think the main skill of them, the main value tends to be in the winter time in the UK, but they do have strong skill in other global regions. The other is another piece of collaboration with DEFRA has put together an interactive web-based tool for looking at plant pest emergence periods in a changing climate that's available online. And there are more thoughts on other sources of information and data in the extra materials. So really a quick march through, but I've hopefully tried to illustrate there are both risks and opportunities from climate change to food security and farming. I think we've touched on this a little bit in the earlier talks, but in terms of planning change, I'm thinking about adaptation and resilience to the changes in climate that we'll see. But obviously, any change in management we make may impact other things, whether that's net zero goals, whether that's impacts on biodiversity, on water, so on and so forth. So we need to think about those trade-offs and consequences in the wider picture. And I'd also very much echo, I think, what Minette said about the need for collaboration and partnership, and really for academia, governments and industry to work together to support effective uptake and adoption of climate adaptation practices. And kind of going back to the start, really, as I said before, it's been very encouraging. Dutchy's not the only example, but to see industry partners beginning to think about bringing climate information into their planning and risk assessment. Thank you.
Professor Pete Falloon from the Met Office, thank you very much indeed. Do come and sit down. I'm sure there will be some questions that will come in from the audience for you on Slido. I'm just wondering if my Slido is working. Is that working properly? I can't see, it just looks like it needs logged into, I don't know. Okay, lovely stuff. In the meantime, Pete, thanks so much for that. Really, really interesting. I'm interested to know from what you were saying there, whether you talked about mitigations when it came to what people can do looking at these extreme weather events and so on. Do you think the agri-food industry is doing enough to future-proof itself?
I'll be honest, I think probably not, but it's also hard to know. And actually, it kind of links again to some of what Minette was saying, and about data and information. And it's hard to know because we could look at, say, the uptake of water storage reservoirs, but whether we know that has been done in response to water shortage is another matter. And I think that then is actually quite important in understanding whether it's been effective. Well, that's the other part of the problem. So if people are putting them in, what difference is it making? And getting data on people making those changes and understanding the response in farming systems is another challenge.
Yeah, so I mean, there may be things happening, but you just don't know about them. And I wonder if anybody knows about them. I wonder if, if that is being registered nationally or by anyone. Who knows? Any questions from the floor for our contributor here for Pete? I mean, I'll ask you the same question, but in regards to DEFRA. How well prepared do you think DEFRA is? How well is it doing in terms of looking at an increasingly volatile climate that we have at the moment?
I think, well, I mean, this, if it helps, I mean, this piece of work has grown and strengthened over the 10 years that we've been doing it, which is really good. I mean, it does focus, as I said at the beginning, very much at science advice feeding into policy, but we are going on a journey that is starting to think about how we can take, well, and that's partly why I'm here to do this sort of thing, explain what we know, but it does have a particular flavour to it. We are beginning conversations with sort of farming advisory services, people like catchment sensitive farming. Actually, Natural England and others are moving into the Met Office building, which actually is quite a nice thing because then we can collaborate in person. So yeah, I think we're well prepared. We're building more and more information on changing climate, more case studies into things like the UK food security reports. But yeah, I think I'll go back to what I said before. I think the gap really is in working together with industry to get some deeper insights on case studies and so on.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in. How important is data to help action changes in farming, and what role do you see AI having in the future?
Yeah, I think, really important. I think that's partly what we've been talking about. Coming from a weather and climate organisation, I'd probably say, I could always say we can always have more and better data, more weather stations and everything, satellite observations, which is true. But I think the thing we're really missing in this particular puzzle is the data on what's happening in farming systems at detail. And some of the data we have, looking at farming systems that goes into things like the UK Food Security Report is very aggregated for all sorts of reasons, which tells you a big picture. So the detail. In terms of AI, there's, well, certainly in weather and climate forecasting, there is a big tilt and a big shift towards using those techniques in all sorts of ways, both to create the predictions themselves, but also to apply them into decision-making contexts. And I think the other one here is the links to it about farmer decision-making, volatile weather. I guess that's about integrating feeds of weather data and warnings into
farmers' AI.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is that on the cards? Is that going to happen?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know. But I would have.
We need Elliot back on here to tell us that as well, don't we?
Yeah. No. I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. Another question that's come in. Does the current outlook suggest that our ability to feed a growing population is going to be difficult with the way that our climate is changing and with the increasing incidence of these extreme weather events that we're having?
That's a very challenging question for all sorts of reasons. I don't think so, but then it depends who are you talking about, and it depends which parts of society and its price and everything else like that. So I think at national level, I'm not so sure, but if we're taking a holistic view, well, you'll see it actually, it's in the climate change risk assessment that actually we are ringing the alarm bells a bit about what that might mean for prices, for availability, for different parts of society. So,
and of course, I mean, we've all seen in the supermarket when you go along and the shelves are empty of certain products at certain times of year sometimes, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, one other question. How robust is our water management infrastructure if we need to move more water to where it is needed most? Now, I'm not sure that's necessarily a question you can answer, but I mean, it's certainly one you might have a perspective on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something we're doing that much in this country at the moment, but of course it is elsewhere. Yeah, I really don't know, but I wouldn't imagine it's set up to do this.
Yeah.
I don't, you know, it's... the things that are doing those kinds of transfers are quite large-scale infrastructure projects, so in other countries.
Yeah. And I wonder if you've seen any examples of businesses who are preparing for this changing climate really well. Are there any really good examples, case studies of people you think have really got it?
Yeah, I mean, I refer back a bit to the Dutchy example, so what I don't know is what they're doing. You know, we work very closely together, but I don't know quite what they're doing with that, how they're actually changing things in the real world. There are some great examples of sort of smaller scale farmers adapting specifically in response to hazards, challenges that they've seen. Local to us, Clinton Devon Estates, it's slightly on the periphery of food, but they have a big sort of floodplain realignment project that's been a really big effort. So yeah, we are seeing it, and we are seeing some of the big industry players as well, big food companies starting to think about it in their risk management as well.
Okay, any questions from the floor, just since I haven't asked for a little while? Chuck your hand in the air if you would like to ask a question. Otherwise, I'll take another of the Slido questions, which is, does the supply chain need to be better involved in working with the Met Office? Is there room for more working, more collaboration, more conversation on climate modelling and the impacts on food quality and food spec and how it's impacted by climate?
Yes, yeah, we are. I think our main customer really in this area has been government, but we are working increasingly with industry. I think actually something we're talking to DEFRA about at the moment is actually, can we have a way to formally engage with industry? Because hopefully, like what I've shown, you know, there's use and value in this information, and if that's true, working together, discussing together what that might look like into the future, what people do with it would be a really valuable thing. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm sure there's lots of people in this room who may well want to nobble you afterwards and have a chat with you about how that might be possible. Pete, thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us. Professor Pete Falloon from the Met Office, thank you. Okay, well, climate volatility is one of the reasons that the all-party parliamentary group on science and technology in agriculture is calling for a radical reset in how the UK produces food. That reset is part of their 30-50-50 innovation agenda, which is the kind of blueprint really for how to feed Britain sustainably by 2050. The idea is to increase agricultural production by 30%, that's a 30, by 2050, that's one of the 50s, while halving the environmental footprint, that's the other 50. It's an ambitious plan, it's really big thinking. We're going to hear from George Freeman, who's the chair of that committee, in a moment. But first, I just want to be joined on stage by Andrew Meredith, who is the editor of the Farmers Weekly. He's been keeping a really close eye on the developments with this. Andrew, do join me, and thank you very much indeed. What do you make of it?
Well, it is something, they've been working on this over the course of 12 months, and we've been not an official, formal contributor to it, but a participant, and they've wanted to partner with us so that, now that the report is out there in the wild, we can help them spread the good news effectively. So while I'm not a formal part of the APPG, obviously, as I'm not an MP or part of the lobby group behind it, Science for Sustainable Agriculture, I think it's fair to say that Farmers Weekly is always keen for big ambitions that will set farming off in a positive direction. Okay,
we'll chat more about it in just a moment. I'd like, first of all, for us to see George Freeman. George Freeman MP is chair of the all-party parliamentary group on science and technology in agriculture. He sent us this video outlining what the 30-50-50 vision is all about.
So I'm absolutely gutted I can't be at this year's AIC Conference in Peterborough to be with you in person, but I wanted to send this personal message. Tomorrow I'm flying out to the Gulf, and next week to Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei and the Philippines, where I'm UK Trade Envoy. And this is an extraordinarily important time for UK agricultural science research, technology, innovation and engineering. Yesterday I launched the UK All-Party Group for Agricultural Science and Technology Food Security Summit, and we've landed a major report, the 30-50-50 report, to government, urging them to move at pace to increase UK agricultural production. And today I chaired the Science and Technology Select Committee as we launched our food security inquiry. The truth is that in order to avoid mass famines, unsustainable global migration, we've got to double global food production in the next 25 years on the same land area with half as much water and energy. This calls for a third agricultural revolution. We've done two, we can do the third. This country is a powerhouse in the science and technology of agricultural innovations. What we're not doing yet is connecting it properly to our growing base, nor exporting it properly around the world. And the Agricultural Industries Confederation is completely key to that. It's a great industry that needs to be recognised as such, and I will be pushing the government through the industrial strategy, the food security strategy and the trade and investment strategy to recognise the agricultural industries of the UK as key, both to domestic growth and to global sustainable growth for tomorrow.
George Freeman, I'm really glad he didn't get run over. He was completely battling with the traffic there. I mean, he's obviously sounding absolutely passionate about this. I mean, more food, fewer inputs, a reduced environmental footprint. What is not to like about that? But I suppose the question that we journalists will all ask is it feasible?
Yes, and there's definitely a time and a place for those questions to try and critique whether it is a sort of an acceptable moonshot, you know, an objective that you set that you know is ambitious but you may be able to get to, or just something that is so out there that it just is almost a meaningless target. But what I admire about, you know, George's is tigerish enthusiasm. You know, he really and the group behind it really believe in the firepower of the UK's research, the many wonderful research institutions that we have. Obviously, some of the best farmers in the world, and some of the, you know, the biggest agrochemical and other firms. They're all here in the UK, and it's clear that many of them feel like that they could be deployed to better effect, many of whom, of course, represented in this room, were there a better and bigger shove from government in that direction. At the moment, you know, all of today has been about strategy, isn't it, in one way or another. And I was fascinated by Dame Angela Eagle's comment, you know, when she came into DEFRA, there were 8 strategies, and effectively that means there are none. And so, you know, they're obviously working hard to try and draw the threads of all that work together and come up with something. And I think it would be incredibly positive for all of the stakeholders in DEFRA if they would end up uniting behind something of that ilk that would energise both farmers, green NGOs, the trade and consumers fundamentally.
Yeah, I mean, it's important, isn't it, that the industry looks at big ideas like this one. The world is changing. George Freeman mentioned, you know, could it be the third agricultural revolution? It's something's going to have to change, isn't it?
Yeah, and so often when you and I go out and talk to farmers, what we hear is there isn't enough certainty at the moment to be able for them to plan in a long-term way, which is how farms function. And in some ways that is true. There is consensus between Labour and the Tories on some things, I would say, but probably not on the right things. They neither have an appetite to deregulate, neither have an appetite to keep the ELMS budget in pace with inflation. They want to pay contract farmers for environmental goods, but they haven't got a parallel commitment to food production. All of those things, if we could have a focus of that is on food and on the environment together, as this strategy lays out, I think you would see a lot more farmers feeling motivated to get on the pitch.
Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us and putting a bit of perspective on that. What a lot we have crammed. If you just stay, just relax in your chair where you are now. Well, I was going to say, what a lot we've crammed in today. My goodness, yeah, lots of new perspectives that may influence our thoughts on how well set up the agri-food industry is to face future challenges. And I'd really like to ask that question again that I asked at the beginning of the day. It's our final Slido poll. We asked at the beginning of the day, is the agri-food industry in a strong position to manage new global norms, both now and in the future? It would be great if you could place your votes, and then if there's any way we can compare what we have now with what we had earlier. So we've got a bit of, I think we're on vaguely the same as we were earlier. Mildly disagree. We've got a lot of mildly agrees. Do we have jotted down what the result was earlier? No, I'm not sure we do. Oh. Yeah, I'm not able to get it on here, but 55% mildly disagree. Okay, well, that's interesting. Thank you, everybody, for contributing to that. And that just about draws our conversation for the day to a close. Interesting to hear what you made of what the Minister had to say. I mean, my takeaways from today, I suppose, are that we really need to get government to understand the potential of this industry, you know, the economic potential of it, what this industry can do. We need to get government to create a better climate for investment and growth within agri-food. And basically get government to really understand that we are fighting the corner for agriculture so that it doesn't always end up second or third or last when it comes to trade deals. AI is going to be increasingly important, and I think it was just fascinating to hear from Elliot about that. I was really scared by the fact that you've developed that tiny chip and nobody knows how it works. I mean, that's gobsmacking for the future. There needs to be change, big ideas, but the question I think that we all will ask is how to forge the partnerships between industry, government, investors and academia to help those ideas come to fruition. I mean, more collaboration, that is what we always talk about, and that's what events like this are actually really, really good for, because we're all here, we're all together, we're all talking, making connections and exchanging ideas. Now, before I wrap up for the day, I'd like to give a special mention to a terrific charity that you will have seen here today. It's our partner, our charity partner, the Farming Community Network. They offer invaluable support to farmers at challenging times so that we can help maintain a secure feed, food and fuel supply chain for everyone. They're a brilliant charity. Please take a look. Please give them some money. That would be great. A very, very last plea is please do fill in the feedback forms. How did we do? Have you enjoyed yourself? Did you go to sleep this afternoon? I really hope not. How useful has the day been? Okay, well, look, I've really enjoyed myself. I hope you have too. I'd like now to invite Jonathan Lane, AIC Chair, back onto the stage to round off the day.
Thank you, Kaz. Well, what a fascinating day we've had today. I hope each one of you has found today valuable and that you've enjoyed hearing from the speakers and the thoughts and ideas that they've presented for us. I think for me, the recognition that we got from Minister Eagle that food production was seen as vital to the UK was a very interesting statement. And also that she was committed to creating a clear, coherent strategy towards rural development and food security. However, it was clear though, she's 2 months in and it's early days, clearly still a discovery phase. So I think for the individuals in the room today, it's vital that we continue to support government on their policy journey of discovery, because they're clearly not there yet. SPS, dynamic alignment, and CBAM all pose challenges and opportunities. And yet again, it's for us as an industry to ensure that ministers have the right information and the right understanding to make sure that they capitalise on the benefit of this policy change and minimise on the negative potential impacts. Dr. Grant gave us some incredible insight, and Kaz, you touched on it there, about how new technology and AI has the potential to support the future. And for both farmers and the allied industries, find a new way of working. And it's clear that land is going to remain in demand. Climate change will only help support the value of productive land, particularly in Northern Europe. And then we went on to hear from Dame Batters, who highlighted the knowledge gaps and the need for a joined up and comprehensive plan for UK agriculture and UK food production that we can all get behind and work to. Of course, we've seen a lot of change and there's been a lot of negativity around agriculture, and we could focus on the negative impact that these issues have created by recent government policy. But for me, the key takeaway from today is that farming and the agri-food supply chain is already facing up to the challenges of change. We've got really dynamic intelligence, a lot of that in this room, and it's already seeking out opportunities to providing data and support to the policymakers. It's very clear that the future will, of course, be different, but it need not necessarily be bad, and we have the opportunity to face it and create a new future in a positive way. So, to that point, I have a few thank yous I need to make to Kaz for keeping us on schedule. Early, you've done a tremendous job. Yeah, trying to coordinate with government ministers to get people here on time. I think the timing for the minister changed 4 times over the last 24 hours. So the AIC team have done a tremendous job on keeping it on track. So thank you for that. To all of our speakers for giving up your time, can I say a sincere thanks for your presentations and engagement. Really, really insightful. And to our sponsors and partners for their generous support. Of course, these events do not just happen by magic. I want to thank, on behalf of you all, the AIC team led by Robert, and for John Kelly. John takes this event so seriously and produces a tremendous event on the day. He's really lived and breathed the organisation of this event today over the last months. So well done for putting together such a great programme and building such a great event. I think today your efforts have really paid off. And finally, I'd like to thank you, the delegates, for your attention, for your engagement, for the mastery of the technology, which continued to beat me during most of the day. I trust you have learned from the day, and to reinforce what Kaz said, we'd really appreciate hearing your feedback. So please fill in the forms and engage. That wraps up the formal proceedings. Have a very safe journey home, everybody, and thank you again.